Welcome in, everybody, to the Flagship Podcast. I am Chip Brown of Horns247.com, joined as always by my esteemed colleague and proud Tampa Catholic graduate, the one and only Eric Henry of Horns247.com. And Eric, we are looking ahead, picking up the pieces from 35-10 loss at Georgia, in which Kirby Smart ran his mouth a little bit after the game, talking about kids who only want paychecks versus kids who want paychecks and physicality. We'll get to that. Also, Anthony Hill Jr., the leading tackler for the Texas Longhorns, hot off the presses over at Horns247.com, has been diagnosed with a fractured fifth metacarpal, commonly known as boxer's fracture. So that's not good, because it puts his availability for Saturday's 2:30 kickoff on ABC against Arkansas in question. Eric, how are you doing, my friend?
Chip Brown, I am doing well. Super quick, since you mentioned, of course, me being a graduate at Tampa Catholic High School. Congrats to the newest Longhorn member of the track and field team, Janiyah Simpson, a graduate of, or soon-to-be graduate of Tampa Catholic High School. She will be joining the track and field program for the Longhorns. So quick tie-in there, Chip Brown.
Janiyah.
Yeah, congrats. How am I feeling? I'm feeling a lot, and we got a lot to get to and not a lot of time. So I won't belabor the point too much, Chip, but that 35-10 loss definitely left a lot to be desired. I'll do a quick cheap plug for a story I just wrote up at horns247.com, which asked, did Steve Sarkisian have to abandon the run game? Recommend checking it out, because Steve basically asserts that the game got away from them, specifically pointing to the onside kick where Georgia scored, recovered the onside kick, and then scored again, and they had to go pass mode. I go through Steve Sarkisian's play calling after the onside kick, but also prior to it. You guys be the judge for yourself whether he had to abandon the run. I'm sure Chip has thoughts on that. We can get into it another time, because it's a lot there. But Chip, that's done. And right now, the Longhorns, they got 2 weeks ahead of them, because they can't get off the rails here.
No. And I'll say that Steve did abandon the run. He should have stuck with the run after that incredible first drive where they ran it for 33 yards on that first drive. Of course, Ryan Wingo dropped a third down pass that killed that drive and forced a field goal. But yeah, I thought Quintravian Wisner was subdued after the game, and even on Monday, because I felt like, I think he probably thought, well, this is going to be one of those games where they really need me, like Texas A&M a year ago, to pound out 20, 30 carries. And instead, Texas ended up throwing it 40 plus times and only running it, half of that, it seems.
17, I believe. It was 43-17. Biggest run pass differential of the season for Texas.
Yeah, that's unacceptable. All right, Eric, let's get into it, because we have 2 episodes of the Flagship Podcast this week. We've got yours and my assessment of Texas at this point, coming off of Monday's press conference and heading into the Arkansas game. And then we will talk to Trey Biddy, who is the publisher of our Arkansas site on the 24/7 Sports Network, about the Razorbacks, who've lost 8 in a row. But Eric, 6 of those games were losses by 6 points or less, 5 of them by 3 points or less, including Texas A&M. And they lost to LSU by 1 point last week, of course, playing under interim head coach Bobby Petrino, as Arkansas is sort of in that head coaching limbo after dumping Sam Pittman midseason. Eric, as we look at Texas, the selling point from Steve Sarkisian is we have a 2-game season. And then let's see what happens. Quote, see what happens with the college football playoff. I think a lot of help is needed in this equation, and we probably don't have enough time to go through all the scenarios. But what did you make of the players on Monday? What kind of vibe were you picking up in terms of them buying into Steve Sarkisian's message of a 2-game season, and let's see what happens with the college football playoff?
Yeah, Chip, I'll start with Contrarian Wisener just because you kind of opened with that. Trey was subdued both post game and on Monday. I think, whether that is in relation to maybe internal frustration of how the game played out, or which could be very viable, another alternative, Trey just doesn't want to do media, and that's fine. There are plenty of players who don't like talking to us, right? I think, the Contrarian Wisener of last year, the Contrarian Wisener of earlier in the season, in terms of his eagerness to speak to the media, certainly tailed off. So I couldn't really get a feel for his read on things, right? Just, we got to execute better. That was the company line from Contrarian Wisener. As far as the rest of the guys, no, I think, Chip, Steve Sarkisian's job is to continuously find ways to motivate his team. He has talked openly about that in the past, right? That he never wants to sound, this is a direct quote from Steve, like the teacher in Charlie Brown, like just womp. He's always trying to find that right button to push these guys. Well, how do you do that, right? The preseason goals were to qualify for an SEC title game and to make a college football playoff. Right now, it's basically slim to none in terms of an SEC title game, right? I mean, that's virtually out the window, right? So you got to find ways to push the button. And for Steve Sarkisian, I think the button to push is, let's just win the last 2 games. If Texas A&M comes in and they're off this week, or they offer, they're playing a light opponent. I can't remember which. I apologize.
They're playing Samford.
Okay, so
Samford.
No disrespect to the great Samford Bulldogs. They're off this week, right?
Who fired their coach this season.
There you go. So A&M is in all likelihood going to walk in as a top 2 team, the top team in the nation, right? So if you beat Arkansas, and of course you got to go 1 week at a time, then you give the player something to say, hey, maybe if we knock off the number 1 team in the nation, maybe we at least put ourselves back in the discussion. I think that's the right method for Steve Sarkisian to kind of keep these guys engaged. And the players seemingly are buying into it, at least publicly. Now, privately, Chip, I think we will see, in my opinion, I think we'll learn a lot about this team by the way they respond on Saturday. They come out, hair on fire, ready to take care of business, ready to take out some of that frustration, Chip, and I'll pass it back to you on this. We heard Kirby Smart talk about, not saying that Texas isn't physical, but that his team is ultra physical, right? I think that's very shrewd of Kirby Smart, not to call out Texas's physicality, but to say his team is just ultra physical and they're just ultra mentally tough, right? If Texas wants to dispel that narrative, I think we'll see it by the way they open the game on Saturday. By the way they come out for the entire game on Saturday, Chip.
Yeah. Kirby Smart's quote after the game was, on playing well in the fourth quarter, he said, we're going to validate in the fourth quarter, which is what we do in practice. It's what we do in the off season. It's what we build our core culture around, is being a more physical team. You have to recruit physical players and they have to buy into that process. I don't know that a lot of these kids nowadays, they want the check. They don't want physicality. When you have the check and no physicality, you end up with nothing. So you're not just getting checks at our place. We're hitting people, end quote. It's interesting because we had Jordan Hill of Dogs 247 on last week, and he said the time to get the quotes from Kirby Smart is in post game. That's when he apparently takes a chug of truth serum and lets it all hang out there. That was a veiled shot at Texas, wasn't it? I mean, that was a veiled shot at Justice Terry and Tyler Atkinson signing with Texas, would you say, or am I reading too much into that?
No, Chip, I don't think you're reading too much into it at all, right? I mean, like I said, Kirby Smart didn't come out and explicitly say Texas, but he made sure to make that point clear in the postgame. I wish I had the other quote pulled up, Chip. Apologies. I don't know if you do. Kirby elaborated on that in his Monday press conference, talking about going back physicality as well. So I'll try to pull that up when I pass it back to you, Chip. But I don't think there's any doubt in my mind. That's the smart way to do it, right? You can emphasize your team's physicality while not directly saying Texas, but there's no other way to read that.
Well, one thing that was interesting in as a follow-up to your story about him abandoning the run game was sort of Steve Sarkisian talking about what he trusts and who he trusts as far as his offense and what he feels like he can rely upon. And I thought that was very interesting because he talked about how, there have been times where they struggled to protect. There have been times they struggled to block. But what we saw in the Vanderbilt game gave us reason to believe Texas would commit to the run like they did against Oklahoma. I thought there was no reason for them not to commit to the run. Who cares if Georgia goes up 14-3? It's early. You need to wear down. You need to play complementary football. It's all we've heard from Steve Sarkisian. And by just going pass, and then you had the series where it was drop by Wingo, Jordan Washington, and DeAndre Moore. It sort of reaffirmed, okay, where's the running game? Where's the quick passing game to Quintravian Wisner? But we'll see if they get that cleaned up heading into this game against Arkansas, Eric, because Arkansas has one of the worst defenses in college football. So they give up a lot of points. They've scored points. They average 34 points per game. They give up 32. But let's see what Arch Manning being back at home, the running game can put together and the Texas defense, which may be playing without Anthony Hill Jr. And that's significant, although they do have Ty Anthony Smith, Leonga Lafau, and Trey Moore, who've all had big-time moments this season. I thought Ty Anthony Smith may have played his best game against Georgia last week with how active he was, and he's really good against the run, struggles a little bit in pass coverage. What are your thoughts going into this one, Eric?
No, I agree with you, right? You did a great job reporting the situation with Anthony Hill Jr. Of course, we'll see how that plays out. But if Ty Anthony Smith indeed is called upon to start, I do believe Texas is in good shape at linebacker. I think Ty Anthony Smith is a guy, one of the more underrated qualities of his game, especially for being a younger player, is his ability to be around the ball. And not talking about, being Chip the third guy to the pile, right? We've all seen that linebacker play before. Who's the second or third guy to the pile? Like, oh, there he is, right? I'm talking about forcing turnovers, kind of that nose for the football in the way that Jalen Ford had during his time at Texas, right? I think that's a quality that Texas could use, in terms of we did take or leave it last week. Could Texas force 2 turnovers? Here's a spoiler alert. They did not. Right. So I think getting the ball off of teams is something that they are in need of. Ty Anthony Smith brings that element to the table.
Yeah. And I think, when you look at, Texas in terms of their defense, their pass rush, and look, the coverage busts were still there against Georgia. I mean, giving up 30-yard touchdown pass. And that was sort of that was the first of the explosive plays that Texas gave up in that game against Georgia. They got to get that cleaned up, Eric, because Gunnar Stockton played really well. 24 of 29. He was money on the money downs. But Texas has got to get this cleaned up because Michael Taft was back, and Michael Taft was involved in some of those coverage busts. So that was obviously disappointing for Texas and the ability to try to limit these passing yards that they're giving up. And now you bring in Taylon Green, who's a dual threat guy, one of the better dual threat quarterbacks Texas will face. Texas has done well against dual threat quarterbacks. What do you make of the the problems that Taylon Green presents. They beat him last year.
No, I agree. You know, I've covered this a couple times. I did it last year in terms of defense corner Pete Kukowski, his history against dual threat quarterbacks, right? In 2023, I did it going back to his time, you know, with previous stops, right? PK tends to usually have a good game plan when it comes to a dual threat. And of course, it helps when you have talented players, right? You know, let's take Anthony Hill out of the equation for a second. Still have Colin Simmons. Ty Anthony Smith is an athletic linebacker. Younger LaFowle's a guy who's athletic enough, certainly in my mind. I think if for nothing else, right, this is the thing that concerns me. Chip, you talked about some of the coverage busts that have been happening. And Texas has allowed a good chunk of passing yards. I don't have the exact number off the top of my head over the last 3 weeks, but it's been trending in the wrong direction, right? And Steve Sarkisian, when he spoke about it, pointed to getting guys on the ground, right? You know, tackling when receivers catch the ball, making sure that they're not, you know, giving up those big chunk plays. I think that is one factor. The other factor, Chip, is I think if Taylon Green breaks the pocket, you can't have a situation, Chip, where there are miscommunications in the secondary. You just can't have that, right? You and I sat next to each other at Sanford Stadium. We kind of went through the play through the great quality of replay where, you know, looked like Jalen Gilbo got picked on a little bit, right? You know, the late shift there, motion by the receivers, and all of a sudden Jalen Gilbo's isolated. He's not able to recover. There you go, right? So I think that, Chip, more for me is not Taylon Green's ability to rush for 150 yards, but if he's extending plays with his legs, how will the secondary respond?
Yeah. Eric, another big concern is the penalties. Steve Sarkisian talked about he was a little short, snarky Sark when asked about the penalties. Texas had 9 penalties for 58 yards against Georgia, some of them incredibly costly, including 4th and 5 offsides penalty on Colin Simmons. But Texas now is 133rd of 134 teams in FBS in number of penalties with 82, 8.2 per game. What did you make of Steve Sarkisian's response saying, well, it depends on what kind of penalty we're talking about? And I mean, does it matter? You're getting flagged 8.2 times per game. Eric, that's too much.
Chip, you know, the answer, and I wrote this, or I didn't write it, but I put it on the board in talking about the run game story. When Steve Sarkisian is trying to defend something, you know, the answer always kind of lies in the middle, right? Yes, of course it depends on the penalty. If you get an inadvertent face mask, sure. What can you do about that? If a guy, you trip someone and that's inadvertent, what can you do about it? But we're not talking about those things, right? Like, we know that. We're talking about false starts. We're talking about holding call. And again, even a holding call, right? That can be 50-50. But false starts, Chip, the amount of offensive penalties Texas has committed this year, I think it's well within reason to question, hey, what can you do about that? Like, that's not out of bounds. I will say this. I did find, of the questions that were asked on Monday, the one that Steve Sarkisian chose to be a little bit short with, I found that one to be a little bit peculiar because, again, he's not wrong, right? Sometimes if the kicker gets the ball out of bounds, what can you do about that? You don't coach that. But false starts, some of the offensive penalties they've had this year, come on, like, we know what we're talking about. You want to clean those things up. Being 133rd out of 134 FBS teams is unacceptable for Texas, right? I mean, that's not up for debate.
Yeah, and Warren Roberson gets called for a hold. It wipes out a 59-yard kick return by Ryan Niblett to the Georgia 41. And you'll recall Warren Roberson was called for a holding call on a Matt Golden 60-plus yard kick return last year early in the first Georgia game. It was like, my God, history is repeating itself all over again. Those are the kind of penalties that just are backbreakers. So it's a problem whether Steve Sarkisian wants to, debate the finer points of what kind of penalties we're talking about. 8.2 penalties per game. That's too much. 65 yards. in penalties per game. That's a chunk right there. Eric, Brad Spence could play a key role, especially if Anthony Hill's not playing in this game. I don't know that they would move him to linebacker. They might move him to linebacker next year after Anthony Hill most likely leaves for the NFL. But your thoughts on Brad Spence as a impact player for Texas this year and a potential X factor against his old team, Arkansas, on Saturday?
I think you hit the nail on the head with that last part, right? Anytime you're facing your old team, your old club, you're going to get a little amped up for that game. Brad Spence, certainly someone, you talked about the dual threat aspect of Taylor Green. He's more than athletic enough to play a factor in that, defending him as well. I do like what Brad Spence brings to the table. Chip, we could have a conversation. Maybe this is for the offseason, right? The Trey Moore factor and kind of getting some of these guys involved and maybe what you would have liked out of Trey, over the past 2 years. We can get to that another time, but I do think Brad Spence, I don't know if this is because I'm being fully transparent. I'm speaking off a feel here, right? I've not looked at the numbers to back up what I'm about to say. Chip, does it feel like Brad Spence is just a little bit more of an impactful player than Trey Moore when, you juxtapose the two players on the field? Again, not getting, full-time snaps, but just from feel. And I'll probably touch on this later in the week, right? So keep an eye on horns247.com. I'll try to, use some actual numbers and analytics to back up what I'm just feeling here. But it feels like if you juxtapose those two guys, Brad Spence is just a more impactful player at these points in their career. Is that fair, Chip?
Yeah, I think you look at Brad Spence has 5 tackles for loss, 3 sacks. Trey Moore, 4.5 tackles for loss, 3 sacks, but Trey Moore's played a ton more snaps than Brad Spence has. So, yeah. And then, I think Brad Spence in that rotation with Colin Simmons, he, of course, is going to have limited snaps because Colin Simmons is going to get most of those snaps at that, weak side defensive end position. So, but Spence, who had 4 sacks last year at Arkansas as a true linebacker, he can rush the passer. He's very similar to Anthony Hill in his skill set, toolbox. And I'm interested to see how Brad Spence responds in this game because, yeah, as one of those edge-setting defensive ends with a dual threat quarterback, he'll have a lot of key responsibility. Eric, let's touch on Texas basketball before we get to anything else football-wise before we get we want to get over to some take it or leave it.
Yeah, let's jump into basketball.
Okay, so I thought it was funny. Sean Miller couldn't quite remember who Texas had just beat. It was Kansas City on Saturday. It was not a pretty display, 71-55. There were a lot of missed shots from Jordan Pope, who was 1 of 11. And Eric, I guess I'm a little surprised that Sean Miller was so, and correct me if I'm wrong, but he kind of said, Jordan Pope is our point guard.
Yeah.
I thought it was way too early to make a declaration like that, especially when you have a guy like Simeon Wilcher, who played point guard for Rick Pitino last year at St. John's, who looks a little more smooth. Help me out here, because Jordan Pope had 0 assists in this game, and he's the point guard. 1 of 11 shooting. To me, it feels like his shooting is not going well. The other parts of his game get affected, and that shouldn't happen. Like Kendall Weaver had a tough game shooting the ball, but he got to the free throw line. He grabbed some rebounds. He had 3 assists. Your thoughts?
Yeah, let's start with what Sean Miller's reasoning was, which was Jordan Pope's assist to turnover ratio, right? And I just want to make sure I pull it up. His career assist to turnover ratio is basically 2 to 1. Well, a little less than 2 to 1. He's got averaging 2.5 assists for his career. In terms of turnovers, 1.5 turnovers. Chip, I'm going to emphasize the turnover part. I think that's what Sean Miller is emphasizing, and not that he's looking for him to be, CP3, be the point guard, right? In terms of having, 12, 13 assists per game. We talked about it last episode. Jordan Pope's 6 assists that he had a couple nights ago against, I believe it was Lafayette, if memory serves me correct. That's only the 5th time in his career he'd had 6 assists or more, right? To your point, yeah, Jordan Pope is a scorer. That's just what he is. And you talked about the shooting. Pope went 1 of 11. Tramon Mark went 2 of 9. So your 2 guards, right? Your backcourt might go 3 of 20 shooting against Kansas City. You said it wasn't early. It's interesting. I will say this, and I mentioned it before on the show. When I spoke with Sean Miller after the Duke game, he said, hey, our lineup is fluid. The next night, Jordan Pope was a starter point guard. And then when we spoke with Sean on Monday, it's Jordan Pope is our point guard. So I think more than anything else, if you ask me to try to read between the lines, I think this has more to do with the belief that Tramon Mark is the better option, the more viable option, the more consistent option as the go-to scorer, allowing him to score as opposed to, or focus on him as a scorer, as opposed to Jordan Pope being that guy. But again, remember, I just want to get this last nugget in here before we go to take it or leave it. The 2 players on your roster who have the highest career season average in terms of scoring, Jordan Pope, 17.4 points per game with Oregon State 2 years ago, and Tramon Mark when he averaged 16.7, I believe, with Arkansas 2 years ago. So one of those 2 guys is likely going to be your primary scoring options.
Yeah. Well, my man Cam Heide can't get a sniff. All right. Eric, you ready for some take it or leave it?
Yeah, Chip. We'll take a quick pause and then come back with take it or leave it.
All right. Don't go anywhere. All right. Welcome back to the Flagship Podcast. It's time for everybody's favorite part of the show. Take it or leave it. Eric, how did we do last week?
Chip, here's how we did last week. I will bring up the questions here as I pull up my screenshot, get that ready to go. It was not necessarily the best week for both of us, but Chip, as my screenshot comes up here with the questions. Texas runs for at least 100 yards against Georgia. Take it or leave it. Chip Brown left it, and I left it. That was a win for both of us. Texas forces at least 2 turnovers at Georgia. Remember, Chip felt confident in a strip sack that never came. So Chip took it. Yeah, I was wrong, and I left it. I was correct. And then Arch Manning finishes with more passing yards than Gunnar Stockton. Take it or leave it. Both of us left it. So it was a 2-in-1 week for both of us, which leaves us both tied despite my best efforts to go against Chip's picks. So I'm just going to have to start going against the grain here with 2 weeks left, Chip. And I am serving to you first.
Okay.
Take it or leave it, number 1. Texas runs the ball for at least 175 yards against Arkansas. Take it or leave it, Chip.
My God, if they don't run the ball for at least 175 yards against Arkansas, Arkansas is giving up an average of 181 rushing yards per game. I'm taking this. Eric, what about you?
I'm just at a point where, again, I have to go against Chip to kind of go against the grain. They better because then the run game's really in trouble. But I'm going to leave it purely for the purposes I got to try to play catch up here.
Okay. Take it or leave it, number 2.
Take it or leave it, number 2. The Longhorns commit 5 penalties or less against Arkansas. Take it or leave it, Chip.
Lord. I mean, if they don't commit 5 penalties or less, what kind of wake-up call was last week? I'm going to take this. Eric, what say you?
Again, I agree with Chip's, premise and sentiment that where's the wake-up call? But looking at the ones that are left, the one I feel more confident in and kind of guessing where Chip's going to go is the last one. So I'm going to leave it purely for those purposes.
All right. Take it or leave it, number 3. Arch Manning throws for at least 250 yards against Arkansas. Eric, take it or leave it.
I really hope Chip doesn't leave this because I'm taking it. I think that he's going to throw for more than 250. I think the receivers, if you want to talk about a come to Jesus wake-up call, catch the ball. I think that's going to happen.
The ball.
So I'm taking
catch the ball. Well, Arkansas is only giving up an average of 245 yards passing per game, but I'm taking it as well, Eric. Arch Manning throws for 250 yards at least against Arkansas. All right. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in to this episode of the Flagship Podcast previewing Texas and Arkansas. Make sure you look for our interview with Trey Biddy, publisher of the Arkansas team site on the 24/7 Sports Network as well. And please like and subscribe to the Horns247 YouTube channel and become an annual member at horns247.com so that you become a VIP member on every team site in the preeminent 24/7 Sports Network. For Eric Henry, I'm Chip Brown. Until next time, we'll see you over at horns247.com. Stay safe and keep the faith.